In this video, we'll have a look at rendering subdivision surface objects using Mental Ray. So, when you're going to use Mental Ray to render subdivision surface objects, there are actually two options that you have, and they're both relatively easy, and use one or the other depending on the particular workflow that you might have. So, the first way is extraordinarily simple. I'm going to go ahead and select this object, press the 3 key, go to my rendering options, and change my rendering engine to Mental Ray. I'm going to close that and render. And there you go. There's an object rendered in Mental Ray. So there are some additional controls that you have over this object now. If I look at my options for the P-Cube Shape 1 node, you'll see that there is a smooth mesh section. So there's tessellation attributes, mesh controls, blah, 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 and tangent space, then smooth mesh. So let's open up smooth mesh. And you can see that there's a smooth mesh preview, which is checked on, which is essentially the same thing as pressing the 3 key. See, as I press the 3 key, that goes, and the 1 key, it goes away. If I press the 2 key, it's going to display both the cage of the mesh, the low poly, and the high poly, and then 3 will just give you the high poly by itself. Now, if we scroll down even farther, we'll see that there is a subdivision levels option here. So you can see that we can display the subdivisions. That'll actually show you the subdivisions in there, and you can see how deep they're going, which is fine. You can change the preview subdivision level. 0 will just give you the plain polys. 1 gets divided by 2 here, and we'll turn on the subdivision so you can see. So set at 1, each quad is divided into 4 quads. Set at 2, each of those quads is divided into 4 more, etc., etc. You get the idea. But then the other option that you have here, and let's uncheck that display resolution, is to use preview level when rendering. And right now that's checked on, so that means no matter what I do, if I change this down to level 2 and render, I'm going to get that pretty blocky object. If I change it up to level 4 and render, I'm going to get a pretty smooth object. Now the only problem here comes in polygon count. On the left-hand side of the screen here, you can see that for my display elements, I've turned on for the heads-up display my polygon count. And if I go to my faces here and double-click this, you can see that now, even though this is really only 24 polygons that are being subdivided, it's actually displaying 12,288 triangles in OpenGL. And that means that it's taking every one of these polygons, dividing it up into where it gets to the smooth level, and then it's taking all of those four-sided polygons and cutting those in half into triangles. And that's how your graphics card actually has to render it. So obviously with this kind of a thing, not a big deal. Have 10,000 of these on the screen, and all of a sudden it's really going to start to really lag on your performance. So it's not something you're always going to want to do. So what you can do instead is, let's go back to object mode here, and I'm going to turn this back down to a nice low level 2, which if I go to my faces and double click, we can see now we're only dealing with 768 polygons. Still pretty good. We're getting a good preview on screen, and it's not going to kill our GPUs to display this. Now I'm going to uncheck use preview level for rendering. So at default, it's at a level 2 here. So if I pull this down so we can see it pretty well and render, you'll see that we get a little bit of faceting here. We'll zoom in even farther so you can see it even better. Well, let's render one more. So there you go. You can see the faceting relatively well at that level. And as you get more detail onto an object, that's going to become more and more apparent. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and now I'm going to increase my render level to level 4, and render again. Now you can see it is much, much smoother, and as far as Mental Ray cares, there's very little difference. We go from 1 second to, well, 1 second. Obviously, as you get larger scene sizes, that can make a big difference still, but you'd rather have that hit only at render time and not the entire time that you're working on a project. So let's close that. And if you need to get even higher, which sometimes you'll need to, sometimes there'll be a need to have a particular area that's extremely smooth, no matter how close you get to it, you can actually ratchet this above the given amount here. Like most things in Maya, if you have a slider, that's only kind of the stock preset levels of numerical values that can go in there. I can go ahead and put in 6. You can see not only is it going to give me a render at level of 6, but it's even going to increase my actual slider here to go up to 7. So now if I can increase that to 7 here, let's go ahead and render. This time it's actually going to take a second because it's got more to calculate. But if we had a very dense surface, you could see this even more, but this is now an extremely clean surface. At level 7, you'll rarely need to go that high, but just so that you know it's there. Most times if you go to a level 3 or 4, it's going to give you a nice clean render, because most of the time you're not going to be getting too much closer than this to a single polygon that's being subdivided. So there you go. So there is, as I mentioned, one other way of doing this, and it's going to take this kind of thing to an additional level, and that's going to be telling Mental Ray to take this object and always render it in subdivision no matter what I do. So I'm going to select this object, and then I'm going to go up to Window, Rendering Editors, Mental Ray, and the Approximation Editor. Now the Approximation Editor allows Mental Ray to do just this. It's going to take these polygons and render them smooth at render time, and it doesn't matter what I do with them in real time. So here under Subdivisions, I can just tell it to derive from Maya, which is my only option, and create. So now I have this object here. If I render it, we get what we expect. But if I take this object and set it back to a subdivision level of 1, I render it, and we still get that nice clean subdivision. Now you can go in here and edit this also after the fact. I'm going to go in here to the hypergraph, and with my polycube selected here, I'm going to hit this button that will show my input and output connections. You'll see what I have going on here, and here is our Mental Ray subdivision node. So right now it's set to n number of subdivisions. So just like with the other part of the rendering engine, you can change the number here. So I can change this, put it up to 5, and go ahead and render, and we're going to get a nice cleanly rendered object. So there you go, multiple ways of rendering a subdivision surface in Mental Ray. For the most part, it is much simpler, and many times, in my opinion, if you're going to be doing really detailed models that have a lot of subdivision surface objects, you're probably going to end up rendering in Mental Ray anyway. So it's a good idea to know which rendering engine you're going to gear for as you start modeling. Even if that means you do a few Maya software renders where it looks a little blocky for the sake of timing and things like that, I'd say that's all right, knowing that you don't have to go and make any kind of subdiv proxies or anything like that, any extra workarounds. You can just use your objects. You can either put them into subdivs like this, or you can use the approximation editor to put them into subdivisions at render time, no matter what you do with your real-time polygons.